They say that as the universe expands, the distance between things is getting greater and greater, a bit like people in Brexit Britain. If this carries on, everything will end in frozen darkness. But it could be worse. We could be staying in the European Union. There's always a silver lining. Now, of course, this is not to make light of the fact that the Brexit result was deeply disappointing for all you people who don't want the United Kingdom to exist anymore. So much so that you're still complaining about it more than 2 years later. You must be doing wonders for the earplug industry. I know that many of you take it as a personal insult that your views were overruled by, let's be frank, your inferiors, the stupid people whose opinions shouldn't count, and to be fair, that's bound to put anybody in a bad mood. Had you won, as predicted, well, the whole EU question would now be settled permanently, and we'd be well on our way to a borderless world run by a committee of people who know best. It was all going smoothly. We were nearly there until 17.4 million xenophobes and racists, including yours truly, destroyed it with a heavy blunt instrument called democracy. It must be infuriating. So now, naturally, you're throwing a tantrum and demanding a second referendum, either on the irrelevant technical terms of a trade deal, talk about grasping at straws, or by claiming that you didn't know what you were voting for, and you'll have to forgive us if we smile at that one. We voted in that referendum after a lengthy campaign where all the issues were thoroughly debated from every angle and point of view, so that when the time came, everyone who was paying attention knew exactly what they were voting for and, just as importantly, what they were voting against. You had every chance to familiarise yourself with all the issues in depth, but you couldn't be bothered. You wasted your vote, and now you're wasting everyone's time demanding a second referendum to compensate you for your own inadequacy. How entitled are you? And on top of that, you've got the nerve to call it the people's vote, a name that's already taken, by the way, so you'll have to call it something else, like the hypocrites' vote, or the cheats' vote, or the crybabies' vote. But we had the people's vote more than 2 years ago, when the politicians told us, you, the people, will make this important decision directly, and we will implement what you decide. They even legislated in Parliament, nice and official, to pass the final decision to us. And they told us again and again that leaving the European Union means leaving the single market, the customs union, and the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice entirely. No ifs, buts, or maybes. They could not have been any more clear about it. There were to be no half measures. It was a final decision, completely in or completely out. And completely out is what we voted for in the people's vote, in the full knowledge of what we were voting for and what we were voting against. Unaccountable power will always be misused. It's human nature. So the first order of business should be to make all power accountable. If we can't do that, we're building on quicksand. The European Union was purposely designed to avoid accountability, to remove the people's voice from the governing process, and to hasten, for ideological reasons, the transformation of a rich and diverse continent of free, independent, sovereign nations into a homogenized federal superstate without borders, internal or external, governed by an unelected committee of people who know best. You know, like they do in China. Their ridiculous puppet parliament, where nobody's allowed to initiate legislation, makes a mockery of democracy. They've turned government into a Freemasonry. And newer members like Poland and Hungary, who were enthusiastic about EU membership, are now becoming a lot less cooperative, because they can see that what they've got themselves into here isn't all that different from what they escaped from. A federal dictatorship where their country exists in name only, and where policy is imposed from the top down by unelected foreign bureaucrats who punish non-compliance. And this is why we voted for Brexit. It's got nothing to do with business or this ridiculous pantomime about getting a trade deal. It's much more important than that. We've seen enough to know that we don't want to live in a borderless world at any price, because we know that such a world would be impossible to govern democratically, And we know that democracy is all we have with which to defend ourselves from career politicians who have shown that if we give them unaccountable power over us, they will misuse it to disempower us further and to impose an agenda that we didn't vote for and we don't want, as they did with the European Union. We were sucked into a full political union when all we ever voted for was a trading bloc. Nobody told us that our laws would be made elsewhere by people we didn't elect and couldn't remove, or that our country would disappear in all but name, but that's what they tried to foist on us. An unaccountable government of remote bureaucrats whose track record proves them unqualified to govern any society. Everything they've touched has been a disaster, especially that wretched single currency which has caused untold misery in southern Europe, but they just keep pushing blithely on. And every time a democratic vote goes against them, they ignore it or they overturn it because the grand political plan is always more important than the welfare or the wishes of the people it purports to govern, which is why grand political plans have a way of ending in tears, as this one certainly will. But until it does, who knows how much more damage these people will do to Europe, undermining freedom, snuffing out democracy, impoverishing whole countries, and opening the gates to a flood of hostile invaders, while having no mandate to do so. In their obsession with eliminating borders and sovereignty, they are deliberately allowing this third world invasion, and they are knowingly presiding over the death of civilized Europe. And they've never even had the integrity to put their rotten project to a vote. So we did it for them with Brexit. And despite being subjected to an avalanche of propaganda paid for with our money, we defied the entire establishment marshalled against us, and we voted to leave the European Union, to get out of its clutches entirely, and to become once again a free, independent, sovereign nation that makes its own laws, controls its own borders, and decides its own future without interference from anyone else. No single market, no customs union, no jurisdiction for the European Court of Justice. That's what we voted for in the people's vote, in the full knowledge of what we were voting for and what we were voting against. And if democracy means anything in the home of democracy, it must, as promised, be delivered in full.